Good afternoon once again, ladies and gentlemen. Please keep going with your lunch if it's still in front of you. Before we press on, a couple of quick birthday mentions this afternoon. Jamie Hoggett is celebrating a milestone today. Not sure where Jamie is, but for those who are sitting with Jamie, make sure you make him feel special. And also Cara Stewart's is with us today as well. Happy birthday to you, Cara, also. The Mining Club is very proud to be partnering with Miners Promise and as we have been doing in recent times, donating a percentage of every ticket sale from our lunch events to the Miners Promise. So last month we were able to contribute $1,870. So just by being here this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, you are assisting the incredibly important work that they do in supporting families in a time of great need. If you want any more information about Miners Promise, Deb Morrow is with us today. Where are you, Deb? Right down that far side down there. She will gladly answer any questions you might have. Before I invite our speaker up to the stage, just a quick mention about the Slido portal, which we're using today. As always, the easiest way to access the portal for today's chat is just to point your phone at that QR code. If you want to go to the website, slido.com, and then enter that code there, 25JUN for June. And time permitting, we'll get to as many questions as possible, though after the build-up, I feel like I'm just going to ask one question. Amanda's going to speak for 40 minutes and we'll all be enthralled. Could be the easiest interview I ever have to conduct. Amanda Lacaze is renowned as a fiercely intelligent and forthright communicator and advocate for Lynas Rare Earths and the rare earth industry generally. Lynas produces those unspellable and unpronounceable names on the periodic table, all the way down the bottom of the periodic table, the ones you see at, in chemistry class at school and thought, I don't even know what the hell that is. I'll probably never have to ever say the word out loud, but here we are. We're talking about it in front of a full house here at the Mining Club. So names like praseodymium, neodymium, dysprosium, scandium, yttrium, lanthanides, the list goes on. I'm sure Amanda will rattle them all off. We'll put it to the test. But their uses are wide and varied, from aerospace, electronic componentry, lasers, glass, all sorts of other materials, military guidance systems. They are used everywhere. In fact, once you sort of do a deep dive on rare earths, you'll be wondering how on earth we lived without them. Lynas has a mining operation in WA, the world-class Mt Weld deposit. They also have processing operations in Kalgoorlie and in Malaysia. The company's also planning a new processing facility in Texas in the USA. So as we invite Amanda Lacaze up to the stage, we have a short video to show you. So would you please welcome Amanda and also cast your eyes to the screen.
We have found our way. It's a brand new day, and we'll be making history. Are you with me? Won't you stay? We have come so far. This is who we are, and like the rising sun, we have just begun to play our part. Pride, let's show our colors. We are heroes and dreamers. We are restless believers, stronger than ever. Never say never. Don't look back now. Don't look back now. Rise up, stand with each other. We are sisters and brothers, finding our place and running the race. We'll take chance and seize the moment. Hold on tight and don't let go of all your hopes and dreams that light the way.
And welcome. Just before we go any further, what were we watching there?
Oh, well, actually that was the first production of dysprosium oxide. So 10 years ago, 12 years ago, Lynas broke China's monopoly on the production of light rare earth oxides. And with that first production of DY, we've just broken China's monopoly on heavy rare earths production.
Right.
But before we go any further, I do want to just start by thanking you all for being here today. It is very gratifying for somebody who has been asked to speak to have 560 of you think that I might say something interesting. Right? I actually spoke at one stage at my school speech night. There were more than this in the room, but they were not all voluntary attendees. However, if you have come hoping that I will say something controversial, I have to tell you I am under strict starters instructions from my head of corporate affairs. On the other hand, I figure on a day when the President of the United States has dropped the F-bomb, there's probably not too many boundaries I can't test, yeah?
And do you know what? I think when he dropped the F-bomb, it was probably one of the most understandable things he's said in recent times.
I was talking to my
He said what we're all thinking.
general counsel, and she said to me, I don't think that's a standard to which you should aspire. And I think that she's probably right. On the other hand, I was reminded, my husband, when our children were little, said, it doesn't hurt for you children to see that you are angry sometimes, right? It does matter if you act on that, but it doesn't hurt for them to see if you are angry, to understand that there are many emotions, and there are times that doing what he did this morning facilitate a response which may be helpful. Yeah.
Just on President Trump, obviously, you know, as he tries to draw some of that reliance and that dominance away from China, you could play a pivotal role in that. How many phone calls would you have to make to get President Trump on the line?
Probably so many that I would be retired by that time.
But you probably do a better job than Albo, who's yet to get any airtime with him as far as we know.
Okay. Now, Jen, can you please look at me and smile, because I did not pick that one up, yeah?
All right, let's talk about you firstly.
Yes.
How did you personally end up in control of the world's biggest non-Chinese producer of rare earths?
You know, I had a very good friend who worked in, who was on the board of Lynas, and she was the chair of the Nomination and Remuneration Committee. I mean, a very good friend, like trust your kids with each other type friend. And she said, come and join this board, Amanda. Everything's good, it's an exciting startup. You know, there were some problems, but management, you know, assures us that everything is under control. And in the room we have one Cam Leung, who was actually, where are you, Cam? Yeah, so Cam was in the company at the time. Anyway, and heading up operations. Anyway, I said, okay, and I didn't do a lot of due diligence because this is my very good friend. Yep. So I went to the first board meeting. I'm like, because you don't know what you don't know. Then I went to the second board meeting and I'm like, maybe she wasn't completely straight with me. By the third board meeting, it was crystal clear that there were some serious issues. I either had to put my hand up to be part of the solution, or I had to resign, right? So I did put my hand up to be part of the solution. Some time later, when I told her that I felt this was not a very fair thing that she had done to me, she said, but I did my job. My job was to make sure there was a competent CEO. And so that's how I ended up in the role. And, you know, it's quite interesting because at the time, the business was in a lot of trouble. Cam and I were just talking about our first Christmas in Malaysia in 2014, when we were at the plant and our respective spouses and our children were at home preparing Christmas lunch. You know, you forge some very strong relationships, and I don't mean to embarrass him, but he's been a key part of our success, which is why I want to recognise him. Because, you know, when you are in the sort of fire that we were in those years where literally nothing worked, right? There was nothing where you could say, I can just leave that and think about it tomorrow. The plant didn't work, we had no money, Our lenders wouldn't talk to me because they felt they'd been misled. I was literally lying in bed thinking about, can we afford to put coffee in the staff rooms, right? Our market cap, we had one institutional investor that had about 1.3% of the company. Other than that, it was total retail shareholder base. And we had no customers because guess what? You know, if you've got no product, you don't have any customers. So we had a lot that we had to deal with, and we have forged this incredibly strong team in Lynas to deal with that. And we do annual service awards. And to give you a sense of this, we just did the ones from 2015. 70% of the people who joined us in 2015 in Malaysia are still with us today. Right, and so as you think about your businesses and you think about IP in your businesses, yes, some of that comes with your knowledge workers. The origination of IP will often come with your knowledge workers, but it's everybody in the business knowing their job and being able to do it because they're practiced and experienced at doing it that makes you successful.
In 2014, when you joined, did you ever imagine that we'd be here in 2025 and the whole world is talking about rare earths? It's being talked about in the context of trade tensions between, you know, the biggest superpowers on the planet. Did you ever think back then that it would be such a prominent topic of conversation 10 years on?
Sure, I always thought I'd be a superstar. When I was a teenager, I thought that I'd be Australia's first woman Prime Minister. Then I thought I might be a world famous actress. Then, you know, I thought, well, no, I'm not so good at that. Maybe I'll be a director instead. Then I discovered business, and it turned out that I rather like business, and business rather likes me. You know, it was quite a good fit. And so when I joined Lynas, Lynas was actually born out of a geopolitical issue, right? An entrepreneur's vision and a geopolitical issue. So Nick Curtis was the entrepreneur who could see the value of the Mt Weld deposit, and then in 2010, the Chinese stopped export of rare earths to Japan as a result of a dispute over the Senkaku Islands. And that's when the Japanese, and Nick was sort of halfway through the Mt Weld development and building Malaysia, but had run out of money, and you know, it's difficult to raise any more. And that's when the Japanese said, no, we want to partner with you on doing this. Now, so we were well alert to geopolitical issues at that time. And I think that as we look at the way that governments respond to the various challenges, you can see differences. At that time, the Japanese actively supported Lynas. It was still some years before Lynas was able to serve the market in Japan confidently. The Europeans set up a study group, basically, to understand rare earth supply chains. And the Americans, you know, launched a case in the World Trade Organization because, you know, you litigate your way out of problems. So some years on, which market do you think has security of supply? And so where we are today, so even over the last 5 years, I think in Trump 1.0, there was a real recognition of some of the challenges with China. And then, you know, COVID reminded everybody of the risks of having a singular supply chain. And so then now we have, you know, the issues, and China absolutely played the rare earths card. And I would say to you that outside of China today, we would still see that there are 3 segments of customers. There is one who ascribe to what I would call the hoping and wishing and praying, otherwise known as ostrich strategy, which is if I keep my fingers crossed and my eyes closed and wish very hard, this will go away and I'll still be able to buy cheap stuff from China, right? There is a second group of customers who recognise that this is a clarion call, and that even though there may have been a brief reprieve, that you know, China has demonstrated its ability to weaponise this economic advantage. And then there is a third group who have recognised it and are actively engaged in setting up new supply agreements with us, and recognise that you do actually have to apply a risk-based pricing approach to sourcing these materials.
Before we go any
I'm not
further...
even sure if that was your question.
Oh, look, I can't even remember. Let's go back to, you know, to Year 11 chemistry, though. And can you just enlighten us, pretend we're all coming in, you know, of a pretty low base here.
Yeah.
All of these rare earths that linger down the bottom of the periodic table, there's 17 of them. A lot of them have just got way too many consonants and not enough vowels in them for my liking. But
they're good answers for pointless, you know.
You must be a hell of a Scrabble player. Go, reel them off first for us.
Okay, cerium, lanthanum, neodymium, dysprosium, samarium, europium, gadolinium, terbium. I said dysprosium and I should have said praseodymium,
Sure.
ytterbium, lutetium, holmium. You know, so, but let's talk about that.
Yeah, what do they do? Why are they so important?
On the periodic, and there are people here who know a lot more about this than I do, right? Including on the Lynas tables, where I have sort of geology types and metallurgy types, and, you know, Cammy's got a PhD, and, you know, I'm just a poor dumb operating manager. So, but having said that, about 75% of the elements on the periodic table are metals. But a much smaller group of those metals are reactive metals. And the lanthanide series of elements are reactive metals, and that's what makes them valuable. There are actually 15 in the lanthanide series, which isn't all the way down the bottom. It's actually 58 to 73, but it's represented on the table as a single LA, which then shows down the bottom as the series. Yeah, I'm getting it right? Yep. And I'm, you know, when I was first appointed to this job, some journo felt compelled to write a headline, "What would she know about rare earths?" because I came out of telecommunications, to which my response was, well, no one was born knowing about rare earths, so I guess I'll learn. Anyway, so these elements are reactive metals, and they have different properties. And so for many years, the colours in your colour television came from rare earths, from europium and cerium. And in fact, in those days, neodymium, which is like the highest value of the light rare earths today, was a byproduct, and so it ended up reporting to tailings in the various mines. Then there are some which are catalytic in nature. So every single ICE vehicle on the road has an autocatalyst in its exhaust system that converts carbon monoxide to carbon dioxide. Zirconium, platinum, cerium, right? So every single car on the road has rare earths in it. But, you know, the sexy elements today are the magnetic materials. So neodymium is the most magnetic substance known to man. But to retain that magnetism as temperature increases, it needs to have alongside it praseodymium, and then for it to continue to work at like over 100 degrees C, it will need to have some dysprosium in it as well. So where are the magnets? Well, I can see some people in this room who, like me, will remember getting into a car and winding the window down, yeah? Right? And I can see some people in this room who have never wound a window down in their life, right? And they just think that windows work with a little button. Well, they do, but that is powered by a small electronic motor, which has most likely got a rare earth permanent magnet in it. And so you see these rare earth permanent magnets which are in all sorts of applications, right from making your phone vibrate through to actually the drivetrain in an electric vehicle, through to your wind turbines, and even in some defence applications. So that's why rare earths are important. And as we develop new technologies, different of the elements, and this is why my job is like really interesting, and it's like a whole lot more interesting than just digging up iron ore, which I'm sure is very interesting. But because we have 15 elements, right, it's managing those and it's dealing with those. And I'm looking down at Daniel Tucker here, Kerry Mining are our mining partners. And, you know, mining rare earths is completely different from anything else because of the way that we do it and ensuring that we actually do dig up the right dirt. Am I doing okay, Alex? Alex knows all about this, yeah. Okay, so then it comes out, and so our Mt Weld deposit is about 2 billion years old, right? It was a volcano, volcano. So it's like this cookie jar. It's really cool, this cookie jar. They've thrown all these goodies into it, and now we're just, you know, sort of lifting them out again. But no, it's weathered over time, and that's concentrated these rare earths, and that's why it's such a high-grade mine. Interestingly enough, if we go into the primary mineralisation, we still have material there, just not at the same sort of grade. So, but they come out and, you know, these 15 elements have been married for 2 billion years, and we need to effect a divorce. And you know, lawyers are not involved, but it can be a little bit complex. And so the process that we go through, right from being at Mt Weld, where we have our beneficiation plant, through to, and you saw right at the very end of product finishing in Malaysia on that DY video. And I mean, it's just so cool. And I was a bit worried when I first saw that. It looks like it's really manual. And I said to Amir, gosh, there's a lot of people. And he said, oh, yeah, it doesn't need all of them. They just all wanted to be in the video. They were all so proud, you know, and that pride in what we do is present right through the organisation, and it is the pride of our people who work in the business that makes us who we are. So right through each stage, we progressively refine this material until we have those elements in a pure form at the end of the process.
Yeah. So separating them is a real challenge, like a real challenge, especially without lawyers involved.
It's like really serious.
As I understand it, radioactivity can also be a challenge you have to overcome. You just have to say that word, even think the word here, and you know, people kind of run for the hills, don't they? How do you navigate that challenge here in Australia?
I think one of the really important things here is that quite often those discussions end up being fact-free zones. So in this instance, right, the first thing is that Mt Weld, because it is so old, actually has a really low level of radioactivity. You know, bearing in mind that the globe, the Earth, is radioactive, yeah? I mean, everybody here who's even got a modicum of scientific knowledge would know that, yeah? So, but our deposit is so low, it's about 6 becquerels per gram. To put this into perspective, International Atomic Energy Agency doesn't require you to label anything as radioactive if it's less than 10 becquerels per gram, right? So this is a little bit more than the phosphate that you put in your, that you use in fertilizer. It is a particularly low radioactive, and it's in the form of thorium, which is even easier to manage than some of the other radioisotopes. Having said that, right, the other thing which is a problem is that people talk about it almost as if you're creating it through the process. Well, you're not. It is a naturally occurring radioactive material, a norm, right? And there are plenty of ways that is managed. It is it poses no more risk than many other materials that are used in industrial applications. We know how to manage it. We know how to manage it safely. And yeah, it's, when you actually look at the facts, it's fine.
So do you have to take any extra precautions for people who are out there on site, or at least involved in the transportation of
in
materials?
A couple of areas of the plant where we potentially would have, you know, sort of people with a higher level of occupational exposure, we have them wear a monitor. In the 11 years that I have been there, we've only ever had one of those monitors register an anomaly, and that was because the employee forgot to take it off and got on an aeroplane. So he got more exposure to radioactivity on the aeroplane than he did in the workplace, right? And so for us, the exposure levels are like 20 millisieverts per year, yeah? And ours have never breached, I think, 2.
How many people have you got in the room today?
Oh, loads. No, a few.
You seem to have a very consultative...
A few ex-employees
right,
here as
okay.
well, yes.
Not part of the 70% that you've retained over the last decade or so then?
No, some of them insisted upon retiring.
Oh, how dare they?
Yeah.
How dare they?
Yeah.
I think we've put the radioactivity issue to bed here anyway. So, let's move on from that. You've got major assets in Malaysia as well.
Yes.
Tell us why Malaysia, and what has it been like working with Malaysian authorities, dealing with, you know, different set of legal frameworks, regulatory frameworks, environmental standards, that sort of thing?
So I inherited the Malaysian facility, and there were certainly times in my life that I wish that I had never heard of a place in Malaysia that started with the letter K. But occasionally I feel these days that I wish I'd never heard of a place in Australia that started with the letter K. And I'm sure that in due course I will feel as affectionately towards that as I do towards our Malaysian facility. Our Malaysian facility is an excellent facility. It was selected because it was a plug. You may have heard the Premier talking about wanting to set up plug-and-play industrial parks here in WA. Well, our facility in Malaysia is in a plug-and-play industrial park. Our acid suppliers, our sulfuric acid supplier is literally next door, hydrochloric's down the road. We have access to electricity and gas. And because it's a Commonwealth country, we have a political and legal system with which we're very familiar, and a workforce which is skilled, English speaking, and you know, indeed a lot of the engineers there will have been sent to study in either Australia or in England. So our Malaysian workforce is just fabulous, actually, just fabulous. And we have quite a number of them now working alongside our people in Malaysia because they have developed these skills over many years. And we're very proud of our work in Malaysia. What's it like dealing with Malaysian politicians? I remember saying to someone at some stage, well, it just seems a bit more exotic than here, but I got to tell you, politician's a politician, you know, whether they're in Malaysia or Australia or the US, they're all much the same. Someone asked me, what's it like dealing with the Trump administration? I said, much the same as dealing with any other administration.
Am I detecting a slight disapproving tone in your voice?
Oh, no, I just...
of politicians generally?
I feel that... politicians should always, as they think about policy, start with what's the right thing for the country, for the people, in the country, and I'm not confident that is always the first question.
Okay. Did that pass the test? You snuck that one through. Well, let's talk about geopolitics then for a bit, because as I mentioned...
Oh, let's.
Sure. Let's get to the fun stuff now. How did we get to this position now where suddenly rare earths and all the products that we rely on that come from them are such a hot topic? It seems, from where I sit on the outside anyway, that multiple governments around the world have just kind of been sleepwalking through this and almost allowed this to happen, and now they're freaking out, decades after they should have been turning their mind to it, because now China's got this massive strategic advantage. It hasn't happened sort of in secrecy or by accident, has it?
Yes, so notwithstanding my prior comments, I will give them a little bit, I will be a bit kinder towards our politicians than that. China actually started to develop their rare earths industry in the 1990s. Before that, they had nothing. Right? And famously, Deng Xiaoping is supposed to have said, the Middle East has oil and China has rare earths. And at that stage, all they had was resource, right? They didn't know actually how to mine it. They didn't know how to process it. They certainly didn't know how to make a metal or a magnet or a high-performance motor or indeed a vehicle. But they recognised that this was an opportunity to do that. Bear in mind, how many mobile devices are produced in China, and every one of those has 8 rare earths in it. Right, tiny quantities, but it's got 8 rare earths in it. So China did work out that this was important and that they needed to develop the skills and the competencies in the industry, and indeed the way that they did it, they moved progressively downstream, and then they said to Western manufacturers, well, if you want the raw material, bring your manufacturing and in-source it to China. Now, bear in mind that from about 2000, well, maybe the mid-90s to about the mid-2010s, the world generally was very enthusiastic about the concept of globalisation, right? People really believed that globalisation would be a good thing, that outsourcing activity to the area of best fit would be excellent, it would increase economic activity, and as a consequence, countries would ascribe to the rules-based order, the famous rules-based order, right? And everyone would live in beautiful harmony. And that hasn't happened, right? And so I'm maybe less condemnatory of some of those politicians even 15 years ago, because there was still this great belief that globalisation would work, right? In the time since then, yes, there have been a lot of politicians who have spent a lot of time admiring the problem, and not very many who have actually taken action. But it becomes very difficult when you've got a planned economy which has executed, and I would say executed extremely well, a detailed plan over 30 years, to say now let's catch up in a few months is sort of tricky.
Okay. People sometimes describe Lynas as being incredibly important to steering some of that dominance away from China. You are part of a solution, if you like, to loosening their grip. How does that characterisation of Lynas sit with you, particularly given that China is still a major customer for your raw materials?
Yes, but not everyone in China loves us, Tim.
No.
That might be a surprise.
Can you elaborate?
And in fact, there have been times when I would say that we would see some of the strategies and the policies have been quite targeted to make our lives maybe a little bit more difficult.
Are you talking about the campaign against you in Malaysia, where there was a malicious Facebook campaign?
There's been some of that. There's been, there's been pricing strategies. There's been all sorts of things. You know, I find that it's not particularly productive to dwell too long on other people's actions, and it is more productive to actually look at what can we do to be successful. And we can be an important part of providing more resilience for the West. But I think that, in rare earths, it's important to remember it's not just about the resource. It is about the resource, but it's not just about the resource. There is a whole supply chain. We do the mining, we do, sort of the processing, refining, but then it needs to be made into a metal, then an alloy, then a magnet, then a motor, and then a vehicle. Now, the Chinese recognised that 30 years ago, and their China 2025 policy said no rare earths exported except in value-added form, preferably as a car. So, I'm sure people in this room know, but last year, 50% of electric vehicles in the world were made in China. Yeah. They were never able to get that sort of leadership role in ICE vehicles. So this is more complex than just, do we have oxide? We can do that, but it is about building out the whole of the supply chain. And I know the Japanese understand this because they still have the two dominant non-Chinese magnet makers who we supply. But we need more metal making and more magnet making outside of China. And I think that there is a lot of focus and attention to that finally.
So all the rhetoric around, we've got to, have a non-Chinese option to produce things like permanent magnets. Is that massively overstated, given that, you could dish up your raw material to any one of a number of countries around the world, and as it stands, they wouldn't have the means to actually do anything with it, right?
Well, no, that's right. So we do have a number of contracts with, say, magnet buyers, we would call them, where they secure the raw material from us. They will give us the address of their magnet maker. And to date, that's all been Chinese. But having said that, you cannot have a modern manufacturing industry without rare earths. We talked about that earlier, about all of the various products that in which rare earths are used. And so if your objective is to reshore manufacturing, as indeed the US government's objective is, then they must have a secure supply chain of rare earths.
How far off is the US from being a serious competitor in this space? Like everyone, playing catch up, but I know you've got contracts in place with various entities in the defence sector. Over there, you're working at a processing facility in Texas. How far off are they?
So it always takes longer. I can see some people in the room who run rare earths projects. They will all affirm that it takes longer than anyone thinks to either get the project up or to get it running. And we've been there and done that. I think that there are two operating mines outside of China. One is at Mt Weld and the other one is Mountain Pass in California. It's not accidental that they're the two mines which operate today, because they're the two highest grade mines. And I think this is the West Australian Mining Club. Everyone here knows that in mining, grade is queen, king, princess and prince, yeah? And so, these very high grade mines are the reason why they're there. It is still years. The runway to there being significant new supply in the market is still years away.
Okay.
Which is other than ours, because we've just spent $1.5 billion on expanding production. So.
Yeah. How realistic is it to expect supply chain investment here in Australia on that scale? Do you see it on the horizon?
We have resource. When I think about this, and I was sort of waxing lyrical before about globalisation, and maybe the reports on the death of globalisation may be a little overstated, but even if globalisation as it was a decade ago is dead, it doesn't mean that that means we have to return to being completely inward-looking and do everything ourselves. At the heart of our success at Lynas is the fact that we have what Australia does really well. We have the mineral endowment, the Mt Weld ore body, highest grade. We have all of the benefits associated with that, and we know what to do with it because we lead the world in terms of mining expertise and technology, right? Our geologists, our metallurgists, our miners, are the best in the world. We are the safest operators, and we do it with a weather eye on sustainability at all times. And that is, a key part of our success. The other key part of our success is the fact that our refinery is in Malaysia, where we have people who are expert at manufacturing. Like really good, like really good at engineering, really good at running large chemical processing plants, and it's a low-cost environment. So we get the cost advantage of our high-grade mine in Australia with all of the benefits of knowing what we're doing there, partnered with the benefits of operating our processing facility in Malaysia. The result, we are the lowest cost producer in the world, including the big Chinese firms, right? So as we think about this and we think about moving forward, we don't have to do everything in Australia. Thinking about how do we partner effectively with others, and in Australia we very definitely punch under our weight with Southeast Asian areas. This is a real opportunity for us, I think, and one that we should be very actively exploring.
You mentioned Mountain Pass a moment ago, the incredibly high-grade deposit in California. There was talk last year about a merger between Lynas and MP Materials that Gina Reinhardt, who's got a stake in both of Lynas and MP Materials, was trying to broker that merger. Is that off the table now?
Well, first of all, the question, Tim, is incorrectly premised.
Okay.
Mrs. Reinhardt was not a marriage broker at all. So, Hancock have absolutely diversified their holdings, and they have been in the business of building a presence in rare earths for many years ahead of that. On the other hand, yes, we were, we've disclosed this, we were in discussions with MP. I make no bones about the fact that I think it would have been an excellent deal for us to have done. For whatever reason, it leaked in a way that was then unhelpful, and the deal was not done. I won't say anything other than...
You've got a very well-trained Jennifer. I don't know what sort of voodoo's, body language you're doing over there, but I never thought I'd see you, Amanda, in fear of one of your employees.
I was saying this to someone before. I have an extraordinarily talented group of people who work for me, both directly and indirectly, right through the organisation. And they all know more about their brief than I know about their brief. And there's a very old saying, which is, why buy a dog if you're going to bark yourself? So I have an expert in corporate communications working for me. If I'm then going to say, oh, what the hell, I'll just go for it anyway, So, and I do sometimes, and then I get into trouble, but that's okay. But the art of leadership is to get the best out of people. And if you think about it yourselves, if you offer advice to somebody, if you think through a problem at work, you come up with a proposed solution, and the person to whom you proffer that just goes, no. How many more times do you put that effort and thought into what you are doing? not very many. And I am hoping that the people in Lynas feel that when they do put the effort into thinking through an issue, that I listen and everybody else on the executive team and give it proper consideration. So Jen doesn't really threaten me, just a little bit.
Would we be having a different conversation if your corporate affairs team wasn't here?
No, because she is right. Because she is right.
Yes.
Yes.
Has that been part of your leadership style? Let's bring it back to you before we wrap things up this afternoon. But you mentioned before you've retained about 70% of your staff over the time that you've been at the helm of Lynas. You seem to take advice from the people around you, your leadership style. And we know that as the person out the front of the company, you have been a forthright communicator over the years, whether it's advocating for the industry generally or for Lynas itself. Has that been I suppose, the key to your success at the front?
So do I have a couple more minutes, Cassandra? She told me I only had 5 minutes. And that was about 5 minutes ago. But I would like to use a couple of moments to talk about this, and particularly to the women in the room. I decided very early on in my career that I would like to be the CEO of a major Australian company. Guess what? Those jobs didn't simply get offered to women. I mean, those jobs still often are not offered to women. But, not long ago I heard the statistic that 1998 was the first time there was a female appointed to run an ASX-listed company. That was about the time that I was thinking about, I'm ready for my first gig. And so many of you would have heard about glass ceilings. The other concept is the glass cliff, and this is where a woman has to take more risk in her career, because if I wanted to be, I was at Telstra, I could have stayed on as a big, divisional, head of division, but I wanted to be a CEO. Lynas is my 4th turnaround, right? And with no apparent modesty, if I'd had the track record that I had and I was male, I wouldn't have had to do 4 turnarounds, right? And that's, this thing where boards say, we've tried everything else. What the hell, we might as well give it to a woman. She couldn't do any worse, right? And that happens. And a lot of the women here are nodding their heads because they understand that they have been in those rooms. So sometimes people say, why did you persevere? And I persevered because I believe there is a better way. The rules by which most corporates in Australia operate are, in my parlance, the rules by which that boys learn on the rugby field or the football field when they're 6 years old. You play to the referee's whistle. If you can get away with a dirty tackle, you do. You scrum down with the bloke next to you, even if he's a dirty player. Yep. You make sure everyone knows your contribution, even if you've just passed off for the try. And at the end, you all go down to the pub for a drink, because after all, it's just a game. Now, many women don't understand those rules, right? But when you look at corporate disasters, or indeed institutional failures, it will be because people have played my rugby rules to the max, right? They've scrummed down with the bloke next to them. You think about institutions with child abuse. Someone knew it was going on, but no one called it out, right? In corporate life, they have done what is legal, not what is right. And it's not that hard to work out what is right, generally speaking. The 4th rule about making sure everyone knows your contribution. And, over my life, I have done probably thousands of performance reviews. I can tell you, doing a performance review with a bloke, the end of it, he'll always ask for his rating, and guess what? He'll always ask for one more than he deserves. Women, They will sit there somewhat passively and wait for their contribution to be recognised. In large organisations like Telstra, where you were forced to put your ratings into a normal curve, you would keep your top ratings for the squeakiest wheels, and guess what? They were all men, and it was always overrepresented. If I were to say to you, what's the first thing that a man will say when you offer him a job? How much money? What's the first thing that a woman says when you offer her a job? Can I do it? What do you want me to achieve? Worst of all, are you sure I'm ready? And maybe 3 weeks later, get around to asking about how much you're going to get paid. And I say to, the women here, you're probably having this conversation with a middle-aged man on the opposite side of the desk. It's not his fault. He's a middle-aged man. By definition, he has no imagination. In his world, if you want a pay rise, you will ask for it. He is not sitting there trying to rip you off. He just thinks if you haven't asked, you must be happy. And so I look at these rules and I think they neither serve business nor the people in business particularly well. And so have been determined to create a different organisation. And I can tell you that my experience is that even though most of the men in this room would recognise those rules, if you create an organisation where they no longer have to play them, they are as happy as the women are. In our organisation, we focus, we have 5 core values, but we really, at the heart of it, we have 2 that really drive the way that we operate every day. One is care. And I want every man here to understand that care does not mean weak, right? I think everyone in Lynas would understand that I care about them, but no one in Lynas would think that I am weak, right? So that's the first. And we care for our people, we care that they go home safely every day, and we care about each other. And the other is achievement, right? So it's all very well caring, but if you don't deliver, then there's a problem. And statistically, it is rare to have an organisation that combines the 2. We have managed to do that. I believe that we have managed to prove there is a better way. When I joined, our market cap was under 200 million. I think it's close today, probably at about 8.5 billion. And that's it.
That speaks for itself, I think. I'm glad we got the extra couple of minutes. Unfortunately, this white middle-aged man has to wrap things up now. Amanda, I'm afraid.
I do still love you.
I can't help it. To those who submitted questions, thank you so much. I know that glancing through them, a lot of them I think we covered. I know there are a few as well that Amanda's probably not at liberty to comment on anyway. And any others, if you really want to take it up with Amanda, I'm sure she'll be around. So feel free, approach Amanda at your
peril.
Your peril. Good luck.
With friends like him.
You might have to get through Jennifer first to get to Amanda, of course. So thank you so much, Amanda. I'll get you to stay there just for a moment and hand over to Jordan.
Thank you. That was an incredible way to finish on that note. I want to thank you so much for sharing your story and your knowledge with us all today. And it was great to hear the room full with laughter in response to your banter and a fair bit of honesty. Thank you.